It's that funny time of year between Christmas and New Year when you haven't got a clue what day of the week it is, what time it is. So I have escaped to my art studio. And it's the perfect time of year for doing a bit of mixed media work. In fact, any time is perfect. And why mixed media is so good is because you can do a layer and then stop. So in my case, layer of collage, then I can go for a long bracing walk, or a layer of stenciling, and then I can go and have some mulled wine and mince pies. My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire. Every week I share tips and tricks I wish I'd known about ages ago. Usually it's all about watercolour, but this week it's mixed media, and I'm going to show you collaging, stenciling, using metallic watercolours, and well, all sorts that you can put into your own work. And the reason I'm doing this is that dear Father Christmas gave me this round canvas in my stocking, gave me a set of rather cheap and cheerful metallic watercolours, and set me a challenge. I don't know if you can see that. I've been using it to practice stamping on, which basically said, use the contents of your stocking to make a YouTube film. So let's do it.
By the way, I do apologise for the state of my hands. I've also just been trying out some new pens I got for Christmas, and they're quite mucky. In my stocking from Papa Noel, there was this little canvas set of shiny watercolours. And then Father Christmas left me a message, and it said, your challenge is to use the contents of the stocking to make a YouTube film. I was like, bloomin' heck, even Father Christmas is giving me jobs to do. Hopefully I can use something a bit bigger than this brush, because look at the size of that. I think I'm going to start off with a collage layer. So I've got some matte gel medium, and the only reason I'm thinking collage is at the moment I am not sure what I'm doing. So if I start with some, I've got a bit of old, what's that, a dictionary and newspapers, and I start off with a whole load of just neutral stuff. All these scraps are left over from a workshop I ran last year. Hopefully inspiration will strike. So I'm going to just glue these pieces straight onto the surface, and I'm not going to plan it out because it is really just getting my head going. And you know how befuddled you can feel between Christmas and New Year when you don't really know what the day it is. And most of this layer will totally be covered up anyway. It does need to be secure because it is my foundation. So if this falls to pieces, then I am stuck. I think I will trim off the edges. Even though this is all very freehand, I'll still think about large pieces, small pieces, direction, just to get balance. Might think about a bit of transparency. So I've got some tissue paper here. So if you're feeling a little uninspired, this is no bad way of starting. You can just get into the zone, I guess, by creating a collage background. Now this matte gel medium is basically posh glue. It is archival, so if you were doing something that you want some longevity to, it's perfect. I have no idea whether I want longevity to this or what it's going to end up like. It dries clear, so you can see I'm putting it on top to help seal down edges. You could use white school glue, PVA, whatever you've got. I wouldn't use a glue stick on a canvas. I don't think it'll stick firmly enough. Let's definitely go for something quite liquid and strong. I've got some white gesso here, and gesso is what you would usually prepare a canvas with, so it gives a bit of tooth to the surface. And This is wet at the moment, but I can just use it. It's not fully opaque, and I can just use it to calm down some of the surface. If you didn't want to do this, that's fine as well. The matte gel medium is good to stick on because it's got a bit of, well, it is matte, in which case I'd have just let it dry. But here, just giving a sort of ghostly image behind. I'm going dipping my brush in some water just to dilute that down because I don't want to obscure all that collage. It's still damp, but a lot drier than it was, and I am just going to rip off all the overhang. I was going to put it face down and trim that off with a sharp knife, but do you know, I think a slightly rougher edge might be nice, and while the paper's damp, the fibres will tear pretty easily. Yeah, by the time that's got a few more layers on, I reckon that'll be all right. These little paints came from Tiger or Flying Tiger, whatever it's called now. Didn't know Father Christmas shop there. I've just swatched them out really quickly on this piece of paper to see what sort of colours they are. And of course, they're not the super sparklingest in the world or the strongest colour pigment, but I'm quite liking this bronzy one and this orangey one and maybe even this yellowy goldy one. So I think that's the colour I'm going to go for. I always find metallic paints take a little bit of time to activate. They tend to be quite gluey, so I would pre-spray them if I were you. And I thought it might be fun to do a bit of stenciling in the background like this. So I've got one of these lovely soft makeup brushes, which I've just discovered are the best thing ever for stenciling with watercolour. I've done a whole video about it, and if you haven't seen that, I really recommend it. And you just use them like this, and you can do multiple layers to build up the colour, and you get such a smooth stencil without it seeping under, and that's the big issue. I'm going to use the same brush because I want a smooth transition. But usually if you try to stencil with watercolour, it all seeps under, it's a right mess, and you can't get lovely crisp lines. Whereas with these, you can. If you wanted separate colours, of course, just use separate brushes. But because I'm trying to get sort of a smooth transition, I'm going to keep dipping in. Crucial thing is not to move your stencil. And that can be a little bit tricky on a canvas because you've got the bounce of the canvas. This is a lot easier on a firm surface. If something goes wrong, I will stick a bit of collage over it and you'll never know. That ability to rectify mistakes is one of the absolute joys of mixed media. Having come from a fairly classical watercolour background where rectifying your mistakes isn't always that easy. God, mixed media is such fun. Right, let's see what that looks like. Oh, that's quite fun. There, what do you reckon to that? Bet you've never seen watercolour using quite that way. I think I might just tint the sides. It's not going to go on super thick, but I'm just going to tint the sides. Now this is a primed canvas, so it's just been primed. It hasn't got watercolour ground or anything like that on, so don't expect a miracle, but I think it'll just tone the side down. And while we're drying, I'm going to think of some extra collage elements I could put on top. And I could use something, I guess, like this, and that is stamped on just brown paper and then cut round. So maybe I could do something like that. Or I'll look at my stash of napkins and see whether there's anything interesting in there that speaks to me. Oh, look what I found in my stash of napkins. This wonderful poppy, and then these lovely, lovely monkeys. That's what I'm going to do. So if you've never used napkins in collage before, you have to peel off the back paper, just leaving that top layer. Usually they're 3-ply, so peel off 2 back layers and just leave the 1 layer, and it becomes slightly transparent. I've started this one off because sometimes peeling it off is a real pain. And the reason I was really excited to find this, apart from the fact that it's got the golden rust colour in it, I know I didn't put purple in the background, but I can always go back, is I was thinking about the nursery rhyme, round and round the garden like a teddy bear. So I can have garden and it won't have a teddy bear, but the idea of a monkey hiding in giant poppies just fills me with joy. Show you my top tip for napkins. If you want to cut out as such a piece, just use a damp paintbrush to go round the area you want to do. Makes a little path, and then you can gently rip the napkin like that. It's so thin. Of course, napkins become incredibly delicate as they are wet, but it's super thin and really easy to tear as soon as you've got that little damp path. I am thinking those will go there. I'm like, yum, yum, blah, blah, blah. And then you could just play around with the placement of your different sort of elements. Maybe something like that. Once you're convinced you know what you're doing, which isn't always all the time, then stick things down carefully. You do need to go super careful for 2 reasons. One is that your napkins will become very, very fragile once damp. And secondly, the watercolour stenciling will possibly run or smear. So try and touch the surface once. If you don't like your placement and think, oh, I'll just move that, you will just end up with a soggy pile of papier-mâché. I think probably over there. Because the butterfly is on a very pale background, really disappears, where this gold background here is more obtrusive. Just tear off any excess while it's damp, smooth it down to get a rougher edge, which I think is nicer than a cut edge. If you disagree with me, then do a cut edge. If, say, you don't like the sort of edge that you've got, you can just use your thumbnail and pull away the sort of fibres and really smooth that in, which is quite nice. I just like the edge to look a little random. Now we need to let that dry. So what I'm going to do now is just smoosh. I'm using these tempera paint sticks in a mixture of gold and sort of bronzy browny colours, and I'm just smooshing that through the stencil and then taking that off, and it's quite a sort of subtle mark but a little bit more opaque, and I think that's rather fun. Watercolour stencils, we've got our collage, then we've got that, and I think I'll let it dry before I start doing some finishing touches. It's the next day and I've been thinking about my little monkey all alone playing in its garden of giant flowers. Everything has dried, and that is the joy of working mixed media. You can do a bit of collage, go off and do a job or something else. You can put on some gesso, let it dry, and you can go and do something else. You can wait a couple of days, come back. You do not have to do it all in one sitting, and it can really fit in with a busy life. So what am I going to do for my finishing touches? I want to emphasize the monkey. I love how its tail is showing through, but I'm going to use a little watercolor just to disguise the edge of this napkin and get its tail to be a bit more prominent. And I was thinking, how did my monkey get into this garden? Must have come from overseas. And I remembered I had these sort of stamps of stamps, so things that I could maybe use to show that it's come from far away. Maybe you've got some real stamps. I'm going to be putting some water on top of this because I'm going to be doing a little bit of watercolour. So I'm using a pigment ink. Let me show you the lid. It's a pigment ink, which means it won't, once it's dry, it is waterproof. These do not have to be perfect, and that is a really good thing because they never come out perfect. I just want some marks that look like stamps and sort of the franking marks. I like how the circles just echo the circles that I stenciled in there. Mask off a bit of that stamp. I actually got some little sticky stamps. I'm wondering about putting one on here. There. Just put one there. Trim off the edge of this one. I was very rude about this teeny weeny brush that came with my set of watercolours, but I think it will be ideal. So I'm going to just grab a bit of watercolour and touch up this gorgeous tail. Because my challenge is actually to use the stuff that I got in my stocking from Father Christmas, I'm wondering about adding some little final highlights using these, because I've slightly cheated by not using them a huge amount. Just pick out a few spots, maybe add a little onto this lovely butterfly that's attracting the attention of our monkey. The joy of mixed media is that you can fiddle to your heart's content. You want to do an extra layer? Knock yourself out. Just adds to the fun and excitement and depth of what you're doing without overworking it. Got a bronze acrylic pen, some dots, and this is almost like a signature. I just like dots. You can see I like circles, from the circle of the canvas and the circle of the stencil, circle of the stamps. So I think a few innocent little dots with a pen becomes, I say, a little bit of a signature almost. I could do this with paint, I could spatter if I wanted to. Very last thing I want to do is grab my little blending brush and a little bit of that dark pewter colour and slightly darken over here so that this is lighter and there's a little bit more emphasis on the monkey. You could do this with a blending brush and some ink. You could just put a little wash of watercolour. I'm just trying to avoid reactivating any of my stenciling or just ruining anything at this point. And by darkening this here, so I'm just going to put a little more emphasis on the monkey sitting up there. I'm going to call that a day. Well, from a blank canvas and some watercolour paints that dear Father Christmas gave me, now I have my little fantasy scene of my monkey living in the garden, having come from somewhere very exotic and travelled across the world, where it's fascinated by the butterflies and plays with them. How am I going to fix this is possibly a question you've got in your mind. I could use some cold wax medium when this is totally dry. I could spray it with some acrylic spray because I don't want to make any of the watercolour run. Or I've got this new product called Liquid Glass from TriArt, which, as you can see, I have bought and not used. So I might do that and do a high gloss finish. I'm not sure yet. And if I do that, I'll put it in a second film and you can see the end result. So I hope that's given you lots of different ideas for mixed media. If you haven't got the same materials as me, and you're not going to have the same napkins and collage and everything, that's fine. You do your own thing and just use those sorts of techniques to see how a painting and a piece of mixed media art can just emerge from the chaos.